Talk about games in Canada.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think they're an important part of Canadian culture from what I can understand, although I wasn't born in Canada. I've been in Canada for more than 20 years and I've been a teacher there and a teacher educator there, and my children have grown up there. Games are an important part of Canadian culture. In particular, because of the Canadian climate, there are games that are very, very popular in the wintertime, like ice hockey, which some would say is Canada's national sport, but that's from a colonizer's, a European perspective.
Yes.
But from an Indigenous perspective as well, lacrosse was created by Canadian First Nations people, and so that also has a very strong claim to being Canada's national sport. I think it's probably similar in terms of the sort of structures of games and how they are formalized in sports. It's probably very similar to a lot of other Western countries in that I would say a lot of children play sports, but those children also tend to come from middle class families, those sorts of things. It costs quite a lot to play sports, and if you want to play sports to a high level, it costs a lot of money. For example, ice hockey, which claims to be Canada's national sport. If you want to play very, very seriously, teenagers or their parents would be paying probably more than $10,000 to $15,000 every year for them to play. And so registration fees, costs of facilities rentals, tournament entry, all of those sorts of things. So it's certainly not an equitable sports system in Canada, and I could probably say, I would imagine that's probably the same in many countries around the world. So one interesting comparison is because we are neighbours with the United States. We see the role of games and sports in the United States, and they come from a very high performance perspective. I would say Canada has a sort of tension there in that it tries to be more participatory rather than performance oriented.
Wow.
Or not as much as the United States, but there's always an influence there as well, and a comparison. But I would say Canada is more towards the participation, at least in the United States, I would say. Speculation. I don't have evidence. I don't have
this
references to back that up.
But it's interesting.
Well, at least offhand. So there's those sorts of things. As in many, again, Western educational contexts, I would say the role of games in physical education is very strong. Probably the dominant movement form in physical education, particularly in high school, secondary and high school settings.
Wow.
Definitely. Let's say innovative approaches, or what we know about the approaches that are best for kids in terms of their effectiveness and the quality of the experience and all of those sorts of things, like teaching games for understanding, has a very strong presence in the physical education research space in Canada and in the teacher education space.
Okay.
So I would say the vast majority of Canadian PEAT programs would use teaching games for understanding, because we've had some very, very prominent theorists, scholars, Joy Butler, Jamie Mandigo, Tim Hopper, and they have been real champions of teaching games for understanding in Canada, and so it's really it has a very strong foothold. And I would think that almost all, I would say probably all Peat programs use teaching games for understanding. So Peat students are learning that.
Okay.
And I think it's getting into schools, but I would still say you probably go into a lot of schools and see the traditional form of games being taught. So those are some reflections on the formal side of games, the organized form of games, the forms of games. What's another interesting reflection is things like, I don't want to say informal games, but games that are perhaps less structured in terms of their organization. For example, pickleball.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
Yeah. Those types of things are gaining in popularity, and you see that more and more in recreational and informal spaces.
Okay.
You know, you might, a lot of parks or local towns are installing pickleball courts.
Wow.
that people can use at local parks
And
for
people,
free.
how they learn how to play this game?
It's very much like tennis. So and it's actually mostly, I would say, people of middle age or older age that are playing these types of things. And you know, if you go to a beach or a lake or something like that, you'll see some informal games being played by families and groups of friends and things like that.
Is this games or playing?
Yeah, I would say it's games because there are rules.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think the way that those games are played is more playful than competitive. Depends who's playing. Usually if it's people that have had experience in formal games.
Yes, they make it very competitive. Yes, we saw that in the pre-conference.
Yes. So certainly we see, or I see, I notice it from time to time. But I think, as happens in a lot of places too, probably most people would stop playing games at least on a regular basis.
Yes.
Probably after university age, early 20s.
Yes.
So that's probably pretty typical. So I would say Canada, in terms of the formal and structured types of games and by extension sports, probably more similar than different to a lot of other Western countries, at least that I know something about.
And now we're at the process of thinking about changing the name.
Okay.
So we want to make it broad enough to include many different approaches that are similar to teaching games. Do you have any ideas on this, like a brainstorming about the potential name change?
Yeah, I've heard of the group that I'm involved in, we often use the term game-centered approaches that I've seen other people in the field use because it's a bit broader.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe game-centered teaching or something along those lines might be, or teaching and learning through games.
Oh yes.
Yeah, something like that. That could be very broad. I suppose.
Yes. Oh, that's very nice.
So yeah, that's just off the top of my head.
Yes, thank you very much. If you don't have anything to add...
No, did you want to ask about play?
Yes, play. What does play mean? Is there a difference between games and play? Because in Greece, for example, we have one word for both. So when I'm trying to translate this, I find it very difficult.
Yeah, I think I would think of play as more unstructured, with few, if any, written rules. There might be rules that come up. Yes. Like, don't push.
Okay, yes.
You become violent.
They come just from the process.
Exactly, like the hidden rules.
Okay.
So maybe those sorts of things. I think it's more play, I would say, is more driven by the participants particularly children, than by adults.
Okay.
But it's interesting when we talk about games, you say to play games.
Yes, to play games, yes.
Yeah, so that as soon as you say that, then games have rules, they have structures, organised
in
by
Greece we would
adults.
say to play.
Yeah. So, when we have defined that, like when I teach a class or something like that, and we talk about some of the definitions with first year undergraduate students, we talk about like unstructured nature. I think I like to think of playful.
Yes.
So to me that would be a fun and enjoyable experience, something that makes you feel good.
Yes.
Usually, but not always, it's with other people, so there's a social element. Yeah, so those are some.
Yes, it would be something like category, playful games, but if you say playful games, what are the other? Not playful?
Yeah.
Yes, it's risky.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about fun, a lot of small children, or young children, so let's say a primary, elementary age, would think of fun as being playful.
Yes.
But older children, so secondary, high school age, might think of fun as competition.
Yes, it's a perspective.
Yes, yeah. So playful can mean different things as well.
That was great as well. Great suggestions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.